Jonathan, I have some questions for you, buddy, from other people. Someone was talking about how I'm intrigued by how the brain differentiates between friendship experiences online versus in person. And would love to hear your thoughts or any research about how those two things would be different and how you would approach those two things differently.
Yeah, it is a really fascinating question. I've done a little bit of work on it, and I've had the opportunity to sit down with people like Sherry Turkle, who's done a whole bunch of research on the effect of screen-based interactions on friendship, and on and also on the exact opposite of that, and on the effect of technology's asynchronous nature of conversations and how that affects our ability to make friends. And so there's a couple of different factors. And again, I'm not a neuroscientist. So these have been my observations. And this is what I've learned, having the opportunity to actually sit down with people who are primary researchers in these areas, is that, I think there are, on the one hand, the screen can be incredibly powerful because it flattens the world. People you would never have met before, you can literally just open up a window and see them. And the ability to actually see all of the nonverbal communication, which is the vast majority of the way that we actually pick up information about other people, is incredibly powerful. When communication goes to the virtual domain and there's no video element to it, that can get interesting, right? Because we can't pick up nuance, we can't pick up subtlety. So we don't know if somebody's being sarcastic or, like self-effacing. We don't know if somebody is being, there's all sorts of nuance that gets left behind. So what do? We try and approximate that with emojis. We've literally created a whole second language with like all these characters to try and add, oh, this is what I mean when I'm typing this, or when you see these letters or these words typed, but it really doesn't convey it, because we pick up such subtle cues and facial expressions and body language and breath rates and in the sound and intonation and rhythm of a person's voice, that it makes it more difficult. So when you can actually have conversations like this, where we're hanging out, we can see each other, you have a sense for who I am, and you can see a lot of the physicality of my presence. I think actually you can get pretty close. But when you take a screen and you put it in the middle of it, there's no visual reference, and then there's no audio reference, and it's just text-based. That's where things can get a little bit more complicated. We lose nuance, and what some of the research shows is we also lose empathy. It's harder for us to empathize with somebody else when it's purely a text-based conversation. And there's another thing which is less intuitive, which is that whether it's text or social media or DMs, which is sort of like overtaking text and stuff like that, it is an asynchronous form of conversation, meaning it's not happening in real time. Like if you and I are having a conversation and I say, hey man, how are you? Right? You're not going to sit there and say, let me see, how should I answer this? Wait. Let me ask 3 friends, like, what's the best way to answer this question? Let me formulate my answer and then respond to Jonathan. Like, that doesn't happen when we're just hanging out, having a conversation. That happens all day, every day in the context of DMs and texts. They're asynchronous. And what happens is the conversations become much more planned. They're not spontaneous. And when we lose the spontaneity, we also lose a certain amount of vulnerability. And vulnerability is the source fuel for friendship. So there's something which allows us to
love that connection, man. I love that connection between spontaneity and vulnerability. That's so true. You lose that a little bit with texting or DMing or emails or even sometimes like any asynchronous. You're losing that. Like, oh, let me share this because you just shared that, or I feel this way, because really you don't feel that way anymore. Now you're responding something, so you're thinking that way, but you're not feeling sometimes too. That's powerful.
Yeah, it's like, so maybe you're a little safer. You won't mess up as much, but you also won't connect as much.
Yeah, I love that.
Dorinda, hey there.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you so much. I really appreciate tonight. I'm in a situation that, a year ago, I was just struck down with serious neck problems and have had chronic pain for the last year. And like Dave Bach, I've gone the stem cell route for treatment, which is beginning to work. So from being very busy and very successful to totally down at rock bottom, I'm trying to get my mindset back. I can't get back into focusing. Do you understand what I'm saying? So have you any advice? It's just I can't get, I'm doing meditation, I'm doing, a lot of different things that I didn't do before, but my mind is flipping all the time. I just can't get, after being in pain for so long. And I mean, in the beginning here, I was just totally bedridden. I just didn't turn the camera on because I was stuck to the bed listening to, GrowthDay. But now that I'm coming over the other side, I'm finding it difficult. My mind is flipping all the time. I can't focus into anything.
Yeah. Well, first, I'm glad that you're turning the corner. You never like to hear about anybody, but family, friend, part of our community here, going through physical pain like that. So I'm glad that you are, you're working with it, you're embracing treatments, and that you feel like you're turning the corner on the physical side. A lot of times when we live with something like that, and when we're even when we kind of have a sense that we're coming out of it, we've been in a state for so long where we are so sort of locked down and we're so focused on this one thing that's wrong, especially pain in the body. Physical pain tends to attach so much attention that is exhausting. And that exhaustion doesn't allow a whole lot of bandwidth to then focus forward on anything that's open, joyful, fun, generative. A couple of thoughts come to mind. Knowing, of course, I'm not a doctor or a therapist, but some of the tools that we've been talking about may be really effective. The meditation, as you mentioned, can be incredibly powerful. But as I shared, it's not an intervention. It's a practice that takes very often months or years. I'll share something with you. So my introduction to meditation, not my introduction, I've been introduced to it and practiced it and even taught it on and off for years before. But the one time that I finally actually decided to make it a sacred practice, a daily practice, wasn't because I wanted to do it. It was because I was in pain. My pain was different than yours. My pain was generated by my brain. So I have tinnitus. I hear a sound in my head 24/7. And a lot of people have it, and a lot of people are fine with it. They're able to easily segment it. Some people have it at a level which is so loud and so devastating that it kind of destroys them. And that was me. As I stand here with you today, it's there. It's always there. It's never gone away. And this is about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago now. And I spent all day basically trying to figure out how to not hear the sound that my brain was generating inside my head. So it was a different kind of pain, but it was excruciating. And what I realized over time as I researched it was, and there's no easy or known cure, and I think people are constantly researching, and people are sending things to me, all the time. But I got to a point where I realized, okay, so there are two things happening here. One is the actual stimulus. There's something in my brain. There's a switch that got flipped, which generates the sound, which is kind of brutal. But then I started to realize another thing, which is that I'm surrounded by sound all day. And like I was in New York City, so like a lot of sound all day. And my brain somehow is okay with that. And what I learned is that it learned to habituate to it. And the pain that I was causing by attaching to the sound and experiencing it as brutalizing and just not letting it go was actually worse than anything the sound itself was doing to me. And meditation to me, I started because I started wondering, and mindfulness in particular, not just meditation, but mindfulness. I started wondering if mindfulness was effective at tinnitus. And what I immediately found was that it can be incredibly effective at helping people move through physical pain. Not that it actually changes the stimulus that causes the pain, but that it can allow it trains your brain to slowly be able to not just surround yourself with the stimulus, surround yourself with the actual experience of pain. but know that the stimulus is still there, and constantly let go, 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 over and over and over, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of times. And I began to wonder, if you could do that with physical pain, could you also do that with the sound that was in my head? It was brutal for the first chunk of months. But I sort of developed my own approach to mindfulness, a little bit of exposure therapy and breathing, that over a period of time started to let it go. Now, similar to you, when I was in the thick of it, I was not super functional because it was consuming so much of my bandwidth. And even when it wasn't, I was kind of psychologically exhausted and emotionally exhausted from being in that place. But over time, like the breathing and the mindfulness allowed me to start letting it go. And it wasn't until we hit sort of like a tipping point of those effects where I could let it go enough that I started to have enough cognitive, emotional, psychological bandwidth to really focus in on relationships, on being generative, on working, on creating. And, for me, that has been such an important part of my process of moving out of that place. And as I said, as I stand here talking to you today, I pretty much completely habituated to it. It never left me. It's always been there. But it's not a part of my daily experience, and it doesn't intrude the way it does. But the fact that it's there, and any moment that I go looking for it, is also, in an interesting way, a powerful reminder to me to not stop practicing, because I know what my dark place looks like. And I know that this practice is one of the things that really keeps me okay. So I know that you've started some of these things. And what I could tell you from my own experience is that they can be incredibly powerful, but also there's a certain amount of forgiveness and patience that goes along with those practices. And also forgiveness of yourself, of knowing that when you are in physical pain, it's not just your body that takes a hit. It's your mind that takes a hit. It's your emotion that takes a hit. It is your cognitive and creative bandwidth that takes a hit, because a lot of that is consumed by just trying to be okay in the context of physical pain. And to forgive yourself for maybe not being, like at the place where you thought or hoped you would be, or having the bandwidth to do these things, and sort of take a longer horizon. And while at the same time doing everything you can, and it sounds like you are, to try and change that original stimulus, the thing that's actually causing the pain, to remove it. And what you may find is those practices, similar to me, that started as an intervention, have now profoundly changed my life and made me far more open, far more calm, far more kind, and creative. So I hope that helps even a little bit.
Thank you. It's just, I've always been very busy business lady, and I suppose a lot of good has come out of it, because it brought me more back to look at things from a different perspective. As you've said, it's all about learning to deal with circumstances, and I suppose it opened my mind to be more patient with a lot. It gave me patience with people in particular, and but it's just what I have is not curable, and I have to learn to live with it, and also my limitations. And I live in a beautiful part of Ireland, which is down by the sea. So I've started back walking, which is a nature, as you say, is a great healer. Even to sit down on the rocks by the sea and look out, and meditate. So thank you so much. I really appreciate giving me your time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And I wish you well.
Hi, thank you so much for this training. I really enjoyed it. Awesome. As a disabled person, I'm really glad that you brought in the topic of finding your purpose, because I think people tie so much of their wellness to their physical state, and our bodies change all the time. And I think it's important to be like what's your backup strategy if you aren't doing great physically to focus on? So my question for you is kind of not exactly related to this, although I appreciated everything because my goal this week is to drink more water. So that was cool.
And I'm going to have a glass while you're asking, by the way.
Good idea. So my question is, I've done a lot in my life. Like I'm a musician and I've toured all over the world and I've done a lot, but I nonetheless have this persistent kind of negative belief that I am like disorganized or bad at forming habits, especially healthy habits. Like that's something I've struggled to like get a routine, like working out or whatever. So I'm wondering, how do I let go of these self-judgments or take like the kernel of truth for them, but not let them limit these limiting beliefs kind of narrate the other parts of my life for me? Like how do you use the things you don't like about yourself to grow and get past it, I guess?
It's funny. Thank you for asking that question.
That's a big question.
It is a big question. I remember watching on TV. It was a couple of years ago. There was one of those home improvement shows, and the star of the show was somebody who was fairly aggressive and very, very obsessive compulsive about what he did. And there was a moment in the show where he said, okay, I 100% own this. I have diagnosed OCD and anxiety, and I have found the perfect profession to actually turn that into a valuable tool to do extraordinary work and channel the energy of it into something. So I think I love the way that you framed it in that, like, are there ways to sometimes turn what we perceive as negatives into positives? And I think, I know Brendan, talks a fair amount about the idea of limiting beliefs. And I've had a conversation in the past with Gay Hendricks about it. It's not entirely my wheelhouse, but what I do know is in the context of my experience of life, which is usually the place I can draw most easily from, is that I tend to take a bit of an exposure therapy approach to these things, where instead of saying, how do I figure out how to completely rewire this belief, just, like from top to bottom and reverse it, I'll kind of like use more of it's actually a bit of a Byron Katie approach. I don't know if you've ever seen her work. It's actually called The Work. Yeah, check out. Okay. Maybe that's a great recommendation for you, actually. So Byron Katie has these sort of like set of 4 questions that you ask. Whenever you're telling yourself a story about something that limits you or that makes you believe you can't do something, or a situation is a way that you don't want it to be, she has these questions that you prompt yourself with. And one of them is it true? And then another one is, what is the evidence to show me that it is? And then what is the evidence? I don't remember all the 4 questions and the exact wording of it, but you can actually, if you Google it, you'll find it in a heartbeat. It's all available, I'm pretty sure, for free online. I found that process really simple. It's almost like deceptively simple. You're like, oh, this couldn't really do much. But it forces you to think about those assumptions that you're making about the stuff that you perceive as being wrong with you or not the way you want things to be, and revisit them. And then also ask yourself, well, like, where's the blessing here? Like, is there actually a benefit to this? Like, could I harness this in a way that would actually allow me to accomplish certain things or do the things I want to do? So I think that's one side of it. And the other side for me is I tend to chunk things into much smaller pieces. So if I'm trying to build a new habit, and this is actually drawn really strongly out of the literature and the research on habit formation, rather than saying I'm going to like do this one thing, I'll say, okay,
or 12 things.
Right. Or 12 things. Yeah, exactly. I'll say, okay, like, of one of those things, like, what is the tiniest little step that I could take towards it that would be like almost insignificant, that would be like just take so little effort, and let me commit to doing just that. And let me set up my environment to support me to do just that. And here's the shift in mindset that we want to make when we do that. We know going into it that one little thing, that one little first step probably won't actually do anything. Like, it's not going to get us where we want to be. But what we're doing is we're building a pattern of behavior change and a pattern of action taking that starts to spiral upward and upward, upward. And that makes it more likely that we'll do that one little step every day, which then makes it more likely that we'll then do the next step and then the next step and the next step, until we eventually get to a point where we're 6 steps in and we're doing enough so that it actually will start to make a difference. but we didn't have to fight and struggle against it so much. It just became this like really easy incremental process moving into it. And that's from the research that I've seen, that's how really long lasting habit change happens. It's almost never really big, immediate things. It's this slow incremental thing where it feels almost effortless. In the beginning, you feel like it's not even moving the needle, but the adjustment that we make is it doesn't have to in the beginning. It's just about creating the new behavior. And then over time, that behavior will compound on a level where it actually is moving the needle. So I hope that was even a little bit helpful for you.
Yeah, because I think that the positive, like the good part about that is that you are not always fighting. So those negative messages aren't always running through your mind if you're starting tiny.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. My
Cool.
pleasure.
So I'm writing this book and I'm creating a website so I can show pictures of my travels to people who get my book. And I feel like I need to decenter. I was trying to figure out what's going on, but I think I just, every time I like jump in and do something scary, then I just need to decenter. And I'm, reeling from going in and creating something. And I was just wondering what you do about that.
Tell me more about what you mean when you say decenter.
That's my description of, okay, so I'm focused and I did something amazing and I just have to rest for a while or something. I need to just like not have important things on. I don't know if it's a personality thing or what, but like all this computer stuff. I used to be a graphic designer, for God's sakes, and now I'm not, and all the programs changed already and blah blah blah. So it's very intense when I actually get to get something done, and then I'm reeling from it, and I just sort of go and not do anything for a while, or maybe I play my little games or whatever, to to just calm myself down or something.
Yeah. I guess my where my mind goes is two things. One, has this been a long-term pattern for you, or has it really become more present in the last 12 months? Because if it's long-term, that's one thing. If it's more present in the last 12 months, we're all in that same boat with you. It's become so much harder to gather attention and focus in the last 12 months simply because of the circumstance of our lives, the world around us. So a huge amount of forgiveness. And a lot of times the creative bandwidth that we have is shorter and we need more frequent bursts of recovery.
That's it, recovery.
Yeah. But that's the other word that keeps popping into my mind when you're talking, which is that I think sometimes we don't understand that when we sit down to intensely work on something that is creative and generative, it takes a huge amount out of us. We think that, oh, it's going to fill us up. And when we're done, we're going to be bouncing around and filled with energy because it's the thing we're here to do. And it's filled with purpose and passion. And then, like for some people that may be true, but for a lot of people, it's really hard. For me, it's really hard. I need to literally, if I'm spending hours writing, for example, I generally don't want to be around people after that. I want to go out for a walk in solitude or just to kind of chill and do nothing or listen to really nice music because it's taken a lot out of me. I love doing it. It's the thing I'm here to do, but it also requires a certain amount of recovery, consumes a certain amount. So I feel good about it, right? And long-term, big picture, it gives me energy, but sometimes in short bursts, I need to recover because I've given so much to the experience. And that's okay. Like allow yourself those breaks to recover. Allow yourself, build them into your plan if you know that's kind of how you're wired, and know that it's okay. Know that you're especially if you're doing work that is intensely cognitive and creative. We don't realize how much energy our brain uses. I think the last number I saw was that the brain consumes something like 20% of all of the calories that we use all day long. So if our body burns 2,500 calories in a day, our brain alone functioning consumes 500 of those. And if you're really, really, really intensely working in a cognitive way, it's probably even more. We need to recover from that. And I think part of what you're talking about is allowing yourself the time to just go play games, go for a walk, take a nap. That is completely okay. If you look at many of the most productive and heralded scientists and artists in history, many of them had built in naps and afternoon walks, hours long, every single day, because they understood that was necessary for them, not only to survive, but to thrive and flourish in the work that they were doing. So hopefully that's maybe a little bit of a helpful reframe.
Hey there.
Hi, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Especially number 3. I have some friends that I've known for a long time, and I've struggled with them in the last year as they go more and more, let's call it alt-right. And I find it quite hard. So this has been really good. But my question is, so I can see how I can do this on my side. But what do you suggest when you're sitting at a table in a restaurant with a whole bunch of people that they have these alt-right beliefs, and their whole conversation is kind of driven and clouded by it, and you know, and sometimes quite derogatory as well. It's you know, it's like, I mean, okay, yes, you could find yourself talking about gardening and growing food and art, and it's great. And then someone will say, oh yeah, liberal lefties, or you know, snowflakes, or refugees, or whatever. All for me, all the trigger points. And I'm sitting there trying to think, yeah, I know, but you love art, so you know, let's talk about that. But they just don't. Do you see what I mean? Any suggestions?
I completely see what you mean. And no matter where you fall on whatever issue is dear in your heart, these are the things that we're all grappling with right now in a very deep and profound and personal way. And I default to an uncomfortable answer, which is that we always want to know how we can change other people, how we can change their minds, how we can change their opinions and their perception of ideas and beliefs and of the moment. And sometimes we're thinking, you know, why don't you just see the world the way that I see it? Yeah, there's a much bigger conversation about persuasion here and about a process of conversation. And there are all sorts of conversational skills if you are truly vested in the process of trying to understand another human being and then move them to a different point of view. And I think, you know, maybe at some point that's a topic we'll explore together. But I think, you know, in a shorter term, in the scenario that you're describing, the question is, you know, like, how can I be comfortable in this moment? How can I find the one person where we really do have this values level connection and really just focus my conversation around them? And then if you keep showing up in these moments or in these conversations or with people where you find that it is actually toxic and not changing in any meaningful way, and you are not able to create that tether, and as I said, you know, before, there may be scenarios where you have to just temporarily pull back a little bit, or change the people, you know, that you're interacting with. It's a very individual, issue. And this is why I say, like, this is a massively wicked problem right now. And I honestly don't have really good answers. But what I do know is that when I consistently try and go back to seeing the shared humanity and to shared values, it allows me more space to be in conversation and to hold relationships that I might just feel like I'm done with and walk away from sacred, and not necessarily lean into them and embrace them on a level where I just want to immerse myself in them, but at least keep them at a level where it's like on a slow burn. And over time, knowing that things may, you know, like come full circle. So I know that's not the most satisfying answer in the world, but that's sort of where my thoughts are on the topic right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Let's start out with Luciana.
Yes, it's Luciana.
Beautiful.
I'm from Brazil.
Wonderful, wonderful.
It's an honor to ask you a question. It was a great lecture. Thank you very much for that. My question is how to overcome or to deal with imposter imposter syndrome, when we don't feel prepared for something we are, right?
Yeah, well, I'm sure nobody here has ever experienced that, right? It's interesting how much that phrase is sort of like becoming a part of common conversation these days. And I feel like as so many people have become so much more visual through social media, through videos, through, that it's kind of becoming a bigger part of the conversation as well. It's interesting. I've heard a lot of different takes on imposter syndrome. There's actually academic research on it that tags it more to certain gender identities, that describes the phenomenon. I've heard very little really good grounded work on how to deal with it. But my approach to it is actually really similar to what we've been talking about. You know, if you think about imposter syndrome, what are we really talking about? We're talking about self-talk that says, I need to in some way be public about something. And public could just be with one other person whose opinion you care about. Maybe it's a partner or a family member or a colleague at work, right? So I need to be public in some way with somebody whose opinion I care about. And I have to share a point of view. I actually have to take a position, right? Because we don't have imposter syndrome if we just know that we have to be present, but not open our mouths or write something or create something where other people will potentially judge us. So it's really about a fear of judgment and a fear of being outcast and a fear of rejection, right? And it's about stepping into a place of uncertainty. So imposter syndrome to me is just another word for a desire for absolute certainty or absolute confidence before you agree to do or say something. So if you reframe it that way, then all the tools that we've talked about today apply equally to the experience of imposter syndrome, right? The awareness and ease practices, the bravery practices, especially chunking stakes, can be massively helpful in dealing with imposter syndrome because you can just commit to tiny, tiny, tiny little things and then build on them. And then realize that there was no basis for you doubting yourself. Or sometimes here's it, and you will all learn pretty quickly that I can take a different lens on a lot of things. Maybe imposter syndrome is actually teaching you something. Maybe it's telling you something. Maybe it's a signal that says, you know what, maybe it's actually, there's no basis for it. And it's just a matter of training in the skills that allow you to actually develop and share a point of view or take an action with the world. And know that, you know, like it may not be accepted, but you have to keep doing it. But maybe imposter syndrome or that impulse is also telling you, maybe my impulse to actually be public with a point of view is not entirely grounded at this moment in time. It's interesting. We have, I mentioned the spark archetypes. One of those archetypes we call the sage, and it's the impulse to illuminate. People in an easier way would be to describe that as an impulse to teach. You know, like there's something in my head, but my bigger impulse is just immediately, the minute I know something, I got to tell somebody else. And what we find with some sages is that sometimes, especially younger sages, the impulse to share runs ahead of the body of knowledge worth sharing. So that sometimes happens with us. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So sometimes the imposter syndrome may be a signal that your impulse to offer a point of view or to share or to illuminate actually has run ahead of a body of knowledge that is fleshed out enough and developed and defensible enough to share in an intelligent way. But here's the thing. That doesn't, even if it's a signal, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't share it unless the stakes are really high or it's life and death and it's too risky. Because generally the way that we learn about that difference and we tease it out, whether it's a signal to spend more time really sort of like developing the ideas or to just share, is we share it and we see how people respond to it. And sometimes they welcome it and they're like, wow, that's really cool and different and thank you. And sometimes they're like, but what about this? And then you realize, oh, I didn't think about any of that. And then you realize that that thing that we call imposter syndrome maybe was actually a signal that says, you've got so much to offer, but maybe add to your process. You're like thinking through these things in a different way as you offer them. So that thing, it's not that you share it anymore. You keep sharing it and you learn through this feedback process, this interaction process. You learn about yourself and how to balance cultivating knowledge acquisition and actually stepping up and sharing who you are, your skills, your values, your truth. Is that helpful?
Yes, a lot. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Yeah, it was my pleasure.
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember and you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.